Wakanda Forever Black Panther 2 is winding down its box office run at this point, fixing to make way for Avatar 2, The Way of the Water, which will be taking over whatever PLF screens that Wakanda Forever still enjoys at this point. And they're already splitting it this weekend in many locations with Violent Night, a Universal horror/comedy, which actually overperformed a little bit. We're going to talk about that. And Wakanda Forever this weekend actually underperformed its weekend 4 projections. So, what else is out there? Not much. Well, there's Strange World, but that's not doing anything either. Another big loss for the Walt Disney Company. Let's get into it. Renegade Online. Well, welcome back, folks. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade. It's great to see all of you out there once again. And if you are like one of the many folks watching this video not yet subscribed to the channel, please take a moment, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you have not yet already. Please hit the notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and of course, please do leave a comment before you head out the door today. YouTube loves the comments. We always love hearing the comments. Try to get through as many of them as we possibly can, and it's a big help to this channel. Getting close to 16,000 subscribers at this point, and it's all thanks to you guys and girls out there. We appreciate you being here. Let's get right into this. We've just got some fresh numbers here from Deadline Magazine. Let me go ahead and pull those up for you real quick. From the great Anthony D'Alessandro at Deadline Magazine, the domestic box office guru over there, Wakanda Forever outperforms during a sleepy December weekend. Violent Night 2 with 13 million plus Sunday box office update. Now, I know what you're thinking because I just said it underperformed and they said it's overperforming, but what is interesting to note about that headline is that if you go back into Deadline's reporting from just about 3 days ago as we were coming into the weekend, their estimates for Wakanda Forever's weekend 4 was 17 to 25 million. And then even yesterday on the Saturday update, they had adjusted that down to 14 to 16 million. So they really overshot in the beginning. And even if this movie does wind up at the $17.5 million mark that they are estimating right now, it's still at the bottom end of the range, but it's definitely within the margin of error to where that could be adjusted out of their prediction ranges, which is really not good news for Wakanda Forever at this point, considering it still needs to reach about $800 million just to reach a comfortable break-even point. And that's something that's looking a little bit more tenuous now than it did before, considering its very soft weekday performance and a worse than expected weekend 4. Let's go back to the article. On one of the dullest weekends of the year, it's good to see some movies overperforming, quote unquote. We'll have the 4th weekend of Disney Marvel's Black Panther Wakanda Forever coming in at an estimated 17.7 million. The numbers, as you will see in a second, is actually saying it's closer to 17.5. And Universal 87 North's horror action comedy Violent Night over-indexing with 13.3, above its $10 to $12 million initial projection. And here we are at the numbers, again, with about a 17.59 million haul, according to them, according to the information and estimates they are receiving at this point. And you can see that the number of screens and theaters that Black Panther was enjoying has also dropped by a few hundred. Again, that was to make way on some of the PLF screens, the premium large format screens, the main screens in each multiplex theater that's out there for Violent Night, which came in this week. Again, an estimated 13.3. I'll remind folks is that when a movie starts overperforming its projections, the estimates also tend to come in on the low side. So if they were estimating 12 million initially, and now they're saying, well, it looks like it's 13.3, don't be at all surprised if you see that final figure actually reach closer to 14 million, maybe even a little bit higher than that at this point, depending on how good these weekend ticket estimates were as the tickets were being sold. But let's look at Black Panther Wakanda Forever, currently standing at $393.7 million in the domestic box office, $339 million in the international box office. Now, that international figure, to be fair and very clear, that would not yet include this weekend's numbers. The international numbers usually come in a little bit later, either later in the day or sometimes not until Monday morning. And I think that's probably going to jump up maybe about 10 to 20 million at this point, somewhere in that range, similar to the domestic box office. As a reminder, Black Panther was one of those anomalies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe where what you would see typically is with any Marvel movie, if it was Doctor Strange or Thor Love and Thunder or anything from the first three phases, with the exception of maybe the earliest where international distribution was not as big as it is today, but definitely looking into phase three, you'll find the international figures are usually about 5-10% higher in the aggregate than the domestic figures, whereas with Black Panther and now Wakanda Forever, that domestic total is outperforming it by 5 to 10%, and that's going to hold up. There's just a higher degree of interest in these movies here domestically than there is in a lot of international markets. So that's one thing that's going to hurt, as I said in the very beginning, that's one thing that's going to hurt their chances of getting to profitability. And as a reminder, let's take a look at an article from our friends at Bounding Into Comics and John Trent from a few weeks ago. From November 9th, 2022, Black Panther Wakanda Forever box office projections significantly decline in the lead up to the film's release. Now, this article was based on information from Box Office Pro, from the numbers, and from a video that I released the day before. And you can see that here cited in the article. And one of the predictions I made in that video is cited here by Mr. Trent. From the article, Valiant Renegade would close his video out sharing his own predictions for the film's box office performance. And I said, I suspect that Black Panther is going to finish its run somewhere in the neighborhood of around 800 million globally, just in between Thor Love and Thunder and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. And based on where we are at this point, and based on what we know from box office history, especially with MCU films, by the end of the fourth weekend, somewhere around the neighborhood of 85 to 90% of the total box office is already baked in. And as a reminder, this movie is going to have some stiff competition starting in just under 2 weeks from now as I record this, and that's Avatar: Way of the Water. From Box Office Pro, long-range forecast Avatar: Way of the Water tracking climbs as pre-sales reinforce the expectation for a marathon run. This is just from earlier this week, December 2nd. Now, what they're expecting is what they call a, quote, leggy run on top of a potential all-time top 4 or 5 debut amongst December releases. Now, legging out for a movie like this will be interesting. And again, that really has a lot to do with what they think is going to give it any kind of competition in the early part of 2023, which usually tends to be pretty lean at that time of year. So it may very well leg out. The problem, of course, is we don't know how good or bad this movie is yet, and that all depends on audience reaction that opening weekend and that opening week, especially as we go through the Christmas holidays, which will afford people a lot of time to go see this movie. But here's the reality of it as it stands now. Box Office Pro is projecting an opening weekend for Avatar: Way of the Water at $150 to $180 million. That would put it behind Wakanda Forever. Also giving it a total run, now this is where it gets even crazier, a total domestic run of $526 to $741 million. Now, that's a heck of a range, especially when you consider a comparably paltry opening weekend. To open at $150 million or $180 million even, and to leg out to as high as $700 million is incredibly unusual and incredibly rare. Top Gun Maverick was more of a unicorn in that case, and I think it's going to continue to be, especially this year, the only unicorn that does that for sure. Now, can Avatar: Way of the Water actually pull that off? Yes. One of the reasons that it might be able to pull that off is because doing a little bit of digging, I talked a few weeks ago about how the opening weekend ticket price at just a run-of-the-mill, very average cost of living area in the United States was showing up on a PLF screen for an evening show at about $17 to $18 a ticket. Well, I just looked up at the same theater what the ticket price for Avatar: Way of the Water would be on its opening weekend with a PLF screen. Now, granted, every screening that I could find in a PLF screen was in 3D, and those tickets were pushing $20. So again, I want to remind folks, you have to take into account the ticket price variance and the ticket price inflation. It's much harder to track now than it used to be pre-pandemic for two reasons. Number one, the inflation month to month has gone up wildly more than it has in the past. In fact, we previously cited in other videos that even the 6 months in between Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness and Wakanda Forever, ticket prices had gone up another 5 to 6%. Now, with this one being 3D, it's driving it up even higher. And then, of course, since earlier this year when The Batman was released, AMC is at that point decided to dive into what they called variable ticket pricing, meaning they were going to go ahead and charge a 10 to 15% premium, sometimes more, on tickets for major blockbuster films like Wakanda or like Avatar on opening weekends and opening weeks. And they'll probably hold that all through the Christmas holidays for this. So even though the numbers might come in great, which this movie apparently needs, that doesn't mean it's the same number of butts and seats as a comparable movie that came out maybe 6 to 7 months ago, just because of that inflationary pressure. But according to James Cameron, Avatar 2: The Way of the Water needs to be one of the top 4 or 5 grossing films of all time, unadjusted for inflation at the very least. You're talking about a movie that's going to have to get to somewhere around the $2 billion mark, with a B, billion, effectively to make any money, which is incredible. And this is what James Cameron is talking about. Will we even be able to make many of these sequels? Maybe they make the third one, maybe not. But that is a tall ladder to climb for any film out there. And it's going to be amazing to see if Avatar can pull it off. Now, as a reminder, Avatar 2 at this point, so far as we know, does have a Chinese release date. But also to remind everybody, that Chinese box office only returns somewhere around 20 to 25% of those box office grosses back to the studio and distributor here in the U.S. So even if Avatar 2, The Way of the Water, winds up pulling off $500 million from a Chinese box office, which nobody's really been doing that lately over in China, that only means $125 million of that will make it back to Disney in this case, not the typical $200 million or $250 million that might come in if it were in another international country or here in the U.S. That's a big problem. So they've got to turn in one heck of a haul, because I don't see this movie breaking out past $1.5 billion outside of China. Maybe it will. I just don't think the CGI factor of another remake of what looks like the same movie from 2009 is going to be that big of a long-term draw. I could be wrong, and I hope for Mr. Cameron's sake that I am. Of course, we'll know more when this movie opens in a few weeks and the reviews start coming out and we start getting actual audience reaction to it and seeing how this movie really might leg out. And then finally, there's Strange World, which is a complete disaster for Disney and probably not even worth talking about very much at this point. Strange World is something that came in with $150 or so million budget, and Disney obviously decided not to put much of any marketing behind this film whatsoever, reallocating those dollars probably more wisely into something like Wakanda Forever or the upcoming Avatar 2. I think they made that strategic decision, and I think they did it right, because Strange World, given its release, not something that was greenlit by Mr. Chapek while he was still there, and then, of course, allegedly full of things that a lot of families don't want to go see anyway. I think the backlash they got after Lightyear gave them enough reason to pause the marketing side of things, and I'm sure that was a decision made by Mr. Kareem Daniel, who is also no longer at Disney, followed Mr. Chapek out the door. If you want to hear us talk more about that business side of Disney, make sure you join us on Sunday afternoons, today, as a matter of fact, at 5 p.m. Central Standard Time, right here on Valiant Renegade for Renegade Online. I will be joined once again by my friend WDW Pro, and we'll cover it all. Thanks for being here. Make sure you drop a like, drop a comment before you head out the door today, and until next time, take care.